The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Kensington Palace as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the third time. 20 years of service in the Royal Protection Unit had taught him to notice everything, but today felt different. There was tension in the air that made his shoulders tight and his instincts. Sharp Kate Middleton walked gracefully through the palace corridors, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floors. She was preparing for what should have been a routine charity visit to a local community center. The Duchess of Cambridge had done hundreds of these events, each one carefully planned and executed with military precision. But Morrison had received an unusual briefing that morning that made him pay extra attention to every detail. Prince William was supposed to accompany Kate to the event, but a last-minute emergency meeting with government officials had kept him at Buckingham Palace. Morrison watched as Kate reviewed her notes one final time, completely unaware that intelligence reports had flagged potential security concerns about today's visit. The protection team had decided not to worry her with details that might turn out to be nothing more than rumors. The drive to the community center in East London took 40 minutes through busy morning traffic. Morrison sat in the front passenger seat of the armored vehicle, constantly scanning the streets and sidewalks. His radio crackled with updates from advanced security teams already positioned at the venue. Everything seemed normal, but his experience had taught him that trouble often came when things seemed most routine. Kate chatted pleasantly with her private secretary about the day's schedule. She would meet with local families, tours the new children's facilities, and give a short speech about the importance of community support programs. The Duchess had a natural way of connecting with people that made her incredibly popular. But Morrison knew this popularity could also attract unwanted attention. As they approached the community center, Morrison noticed the unusually large crowd gathered outside. The original estimate had been for about 50 people, but he could see at least twice that number pressed against the security barriers. Some held welcome signs and flowers, their faces bright with excitement. Others seemed more aggressive in their positioning, pushing closer to the barriers and speaking loudly among themselves. The vehicle pulled up to the designated entrance, and Morrison stepped out first, his trained eyes immediately assessing potential threats. Most of the crowd seemed genuinely happy to see Kate, but there was a group of about 10 people near the back who were chanting something he couldn't quite make out. Their signs were different too. Not welcoming messages, but what looked like protest slogans. Kate emerged from the vehicle with her characteristic smile and wave, immediately drawing cheers from the friendly portion of the crowd. She moved toward the community center entrance, stopping occasionally to accept flowers from children and exchange brief words with families who had waited hours for this moment. Morrison stayed close, but tried to remain invisible, knowing that heavy-handed security could ruin the warm atmosphere Kate worked so hard to create. The first sign of real trouble came when the chanting group pushed forward, their voices becoming louder and more aggressive. Morrison caught fragments of their words and realized they were protesting recent government policies, somehow blaming the royal family for decisions that had nothing to do with them. Security barriers that had seemed sturdy moments before began to strain under the pressure of bodies pushing forward. Local police officers moved to reinforce the barriers, but Morrison could see that the situation was developing faster than anyone had anticipated. The protest group had grown as more people joined them, and their chants were beginning to drown out the welcome cheers from Kate's supporters. What worried Morrison most was that several of the protesters had managed to position themselves directly along Kate's planned walking route. Kate seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. Though she maintained her composure perfectly, years of public appearances had taught her to read crowds, and Morrison saw her subtly adjust her pace and positioning in response to the growing tension. She continued greeting well-wishers, but her movements became more purposeful, less leisurely. The moment that made Morrison's blood run cold came when he spotted a man in his 30s, pushing aggressively through the crowd toward Kate's position. The man's face was flushed with anger. He was shouting words that Morrison couldn't hear clearly over the general noise. More concerning was the fact that the man seemed to have something clutched. In his right hand, Morrison immediately activated his radio to alert the rest of the security team while simultaneously moving closer to Kate's position. The Duchess was currently accepting a small bouquet from an elderly woman and remained completely unaware of the approaching threat. The local police were focused on managing the larger protest group and hadn't noticed the individual making his way forward. The man was now only about 15 feet away from Kate, still pushing through the crowd with determination that worried Morrison greatly. Other members of the public seemed to sense something was wrong and began moving away from the man's path, creating a clear line between him and the Duchess. Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon as he calculated angles and distances. Just as Morrison was about to intervene directly, his radio crackled with an unexpected message. Prince William's voice came through clearly, announcing that he was en route to the location and would arrive within minutes. The prince had somehow learned about the developing situation and was racing across London to reach the community center. Morrison felt a mixture of relief and increased concern. Having Prince William on site would certainly help with crowd management and Kate's security. But it also meant coordinating protection for two high-value targets in an increasingly volatile situation. The aggressive man was now only 10 feet away from Kate, and Morrison could see that whatever he held in his hand was being raised, as if he intended to throw it. The next few moments would determine whether this routine charity visit became a security incident that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Morrison took a deep breath and prepared to act, knowing that the decisions made in the next 60 seconds would affect not just Kate's immediate safety, but the entire royal family's approach to public engagements going forward. Morrison's training kicked in as he moved swiftly through the crowd toward Kate's position. The aggressive man was now close enough that Morrison could see the object in his hand was a glass bottle, partially filled with what looked like red paint. The man's face showed the kind of focused anger that Morrison had learned to recognize as genuinely dangerous. Not just the excitement of an overeager fan, Kate was still engaged in conversation with the elderly woman who had given her flowers, completely unaware of the approaching threat. Morrison knew he had seconds to act before the situation escalated beyond control. He spoke quietly into his radio, coordinating with other security personnel to create a protective perimeter without causing panic among the innocent bystanders. The crowd around them was a mixture of genuine royal supporters and curious onlookers who had stopped to see what the excitement was about. Children held small Union Jack flags, while their parents took photos with their phones. The contrast between this normal, happy scene and the danger moving through it made Morrison's job exponentially more difficult. Any aggressive action on his part could trigger a panic that might injure dozens of people. Prince William's convoy was still several minutes away, racing through London traffic with police escorts clearing the route. Morrison knew he couldn't wait for backup that might arrive too late. The man with the bottle had pushed past the last row of spectators and was now in the open space directly behind Kate. Raising his arm in preparation to throw, Morrison made his move, stepping between Kate and the threat while reaching for his radio to signal the other security personnel. But as he moved, something unexpected happened. The elderly woman Kate had been speaking with suddenly turned around and saw the man approaching with obvious hostile intent. Instead of screaming or running away, the woman stepped forward and spoke loudly in a voice that carried clearly across the immediate area. "Young man, what do you think you're doing?" she said sharply, using the tone of someone accustomed to dealing with unruly behavior. The directness and authority in her voice was so surprising that not only did the man pause, but several other people in the crowd turned to look at what was happening. Morrison used this momentary distraction to position himself more effectively. He could now see that there were actually two other men moving through the crowd toward Kate's position, though they were further back and moving more carefully than the first threat. The situation was more complex than he had initially realized, and Morrison began to suspect this wasn't a spontaneous outburst, but a coordinated attempt to disrupt the Duchess's appearance. Kate finally sensed that something was wrong. Her years of public appearances had given her excellent instincts about crowd dynamics, and the sudden change in energy around her was impossible to ignore. She turned slightly to see what had captured everyone's attention and found herself looking directly at Morrison's tense face as he positioned himself. Protectively, the man with the bottle seemed momentarily confused by the elderly woman's intervention, but his anger quickly returned. He shouted something about royal privilege and government policies, his words becoming more incoherent as his emotions escalated. Morrison could see that reasoning with him would be impossible, and physical intervention was becoming inevitable. Local police officers had finally noticed the disturbance and were moving through the crowd, but their progress was slow due to the number of people packed into the small area. Morrison realized he would need to handle the immediate threat himself while coordinating with the approaching officers to deal with the other suspicious individuals. Kate demonstrated the composure that had made her such an effective public figure by calmly stepping back toward the community center entrance without showing any sign of panic. Her movement was smooth enough that most of the crowd didn't realize anything serious was happening, but it created the space Morrison needed to act effectively. The man finally committed to his attack. Drawing back his arm to throw the bottle at Kate, Morrison moved forward aggressively, intercepting the throw and grabbing the man's wrist before the bottle could be released. The sudden physical contact triggered exactly the kind of commotion Morrison had been trying to avoid, as people nearby began shouting and pushing away from the confrontation. Just as Morrison was restraining the first attacker, he heard the distinctive sound of Prince William's motorcade arriving at the scene. The prince's vehicle stopped directly in front of the community center, and William emerged before his own security detail could fully assess the situation. Morrison felt a moment of professional frustration, knowing that the prince was walking into a partially contained security incident without proper briefing. Prince William's appearance had an immediate calming effect on most of the crowd, but it also seemed to energize the other protesters Morrison had identified. The two men who had been working their way forward suddenly became more aggressive, pushing directly toward where Kate was standing. Morrison found himself in the impossible position of needing to be in three places at once. The elderly woman who had first confronted the attacker continued to play an unexpected role in the situation. She positioned herself near Kate and began speaking loudly to the crowd about showing proper respect for their guests. Her authoritative presence seemed to rally some of the legitimate supporters, who began forming a protective barrier around the Duchess without really understanding why. Prince William quickly assessed the situation and made a decision that surprised everyone, including Morrison. Instead of immediately moving to Kate's side, the prince walked directly toward the area where the protest group was gathered. His approach was confident but non-threatening, and he began engaging the protesters in conversation rather than allowing his security to remove them. Morrison watched this development with professional admiration mixed with concern. Prince William's willingness to directly address the source of the tension was exactly the kind of leadership that made him effective, but it also created additional security challenges. Morrison now had to coordinate protection for both royals while they were separated and dealing with different aspects of the same threat. The man Morrison had restrained was now being handled by local police, but the bottle had broken during the struggle, creating a mess of red paint and glass that was causing additional confusion among the bystanders. Morrison used his radio to request cleanup crews while simultaneously tracking the movements of the remaining suspicious individuals. The next few minutes would determine whether Prince William's unconventional approach to handling the situation would diffuse the tension, or create new complications that could put both royals at risk. Prince William's approach to the protest group was unlike anything Morrison had witnessed in his 20 years of royal protection service. Instead of allowing security to create distance between himself and the agitated protesters, William walked directly toward them with open body language and a calm expression. Morrison's immediate instinct was to intervene, but his training also told him to trust the prince's judgment. Unless an immediate physical threat emerged, the protesters seemed as surprised as everyone else by William's direct approach. They had clearly prepared for confrontation with security personnel or police, but facing the prince himself in friendly conversation through their planned disruption, completely off balance, their angry chants gradually died down as William began asking genuine questions about their concerns and listening to their responses. Kate watched her husband's bold move with visible tension. Though she maintained her composed exterior, Morrison could see her calculating whether to stay in her current position or move closer to William's location. The protective barrier of supportive community members that had formed around her was helping maintain order in her immediate area. But the overall situation remained unpredictable. One of the two remaining suspicious individuals Morrison had been tracking made a critical mistake by moving too aggressively toward Prince William's position. Morrison immediately radioed the description to other security personnel, while beginning to work his way through the crowd himself. The man's movements were too purposeful and direct to be those of a curious bystander, and Morrison's experience told him this person represented a serious threat. The elderly woman who had initially confronted the first attacker continued to demonstrate remarkable presence of mind. She had positioned herself strategically near Kate and was engaging other community members in conversation, effectively recruiting additional informal protection without anyone realizing what she was doing. Morrison made a mental note to commend her actions in his report, recognizing that civilian intervention had actually improved the security situation. Prince William's conversation with the protest group was beginning to have the effect he had probably hoped for. Several of the more moderate protesters were lowering their signs and engaging in actual dialogue about their concerns. However, Morrison noticed that a core group of about 4 individuals remained hostile and were becoming frustrated by Williams' calm responses to their accusations. The community center director had been watching the developing situation from the entrance and finally decided to act. She approached Kate with obvious nervousness but genuine concern, suggesting they move the planned activities indoors where the environment could be better controlled. Kate graciously accepted the suggestion, but indicated she wanted to wait until William was ready to join her. Morrison's radio crackled with an update from the advanced security team inside the community center. They had completed a thorough sweep of the building and confirmed that the interior was secure, with multiple exit routes available if the outdoor situation deteriorated further. This information provided Morrison with some relief, knowing they had a safe fallback position if needed. The man Morrison had been tracking was now close enough to Prince William's position to pose a direct threat. Morrison could see that this individual was more sophisticated than the first attacker, keeping his hands visible and his movements casual enough to avoid drawing attention from the local police. Only Morrison's trained eye and advanced positioning allowed him to recognize the danger prince. William seemed to sense something was wrong, even while maintaining his conversation with the protesters. Morrison watched as the prince's posture subtly shifted into a more alert stance, and his positioning changed to provide better angles for his security team to intervene if necessary. The prince's military training was evident in these small adjustments that probably went unnoticed by everyone except the protection specialists. The critical moment came when the sophisticated attacker finally made his move. Instead of producing a weapon or projectile like the first man, he simply walked up to Prince William as if he wanted to shake hands. Morrison recognized this as potentially the most dangerous type of approach, as it could conceal anything from a concealed weapon to a chemical substance on the man's hands. Morrison activated his emergency signal and began moving rapidly toward Prince William's position. But the crowd was dense, and his progress was slower than he needed. He could see other security personnel converging from different angles, but they all faced the same challenge of reaching the prince before the unknown individual could complete whatever he was planning. Kate noticed the sudden change in security personnel movement and realized something serious was developing around her husband's position. Despite every instinct telling her to move away from potential danger, she began walking toward William, understanding that separating the royal couple at this moment could create additional complications for their protection team. The elderly woman, who had been so helpful throughout the incident, noticed Kate's movement and immediately understood what was happening. Without being asked or directed, she began organizing the supportive community members to create a clear path for Kate to reach her husband, while simultaneously providing additional barriers against any other potential threats in the crowd. Prince William saw Morrison and the other security personnel approaching, and understood that the situation was escalating beyond what his conversational approach could handle. He began politely, but firmly extracting himself from the discussion with the protesters. thanking them for sharing their concerns while slowly backing toward Kate's position. The sophisticated attacker realized his window of opportunity was closing as security personnel closed in on his position. Morrison could see the man's face change expression as he calculated his options. And Morrison knew from experience that this was the most dangerous moment of any security incident. A trapped threat often became an unpredictable one. The man suddenly reached inside his jacket, triggering immediate responses from multiple security personnel. Morrison was still fighting through the crowd but could see that at least two other protection specialists had clear approaches to the threat. The next few seconds would determine whether the prince's brave but risky approach to crowd management would end in success or create the exact kind of incident everyone had been working to prevent. As Morrison finally broke through the last barrier of bystanders between himself and Prince William's position, he could see that Kate was also approaching from the other direction, creating a convergence of all the key elements that would define how this confrontation would end. The moment the suspicious man reached inside his jacket, time seemed to slow down for Morrison. His 20 years of training compressed into pure instinct as he pushed through the final group of bystanders, separating him from Prince William's position. Two other protection officers were approaching from different angles, but Morrison could see he would reach the potential threat first, Prince William's military background became evident as he immediately recognized the change in the situation's dynamics. Instead of freezing or backing away, the prince stepped slightly to his left, creating a better angle for his security team while simultaneously positioning himself between the potential threat and the nearest bystanders. His movement was subtle enough that most of the crowd didn't notice, but it demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical awareness that made him easier to protect. Kate had covered about half the distance to her husband's position when she also noticed the sudden tension in the security team's movements. Her instincts told her to continue moving toward William, but Morrison caught her eye and gave her a subtle signal to pause where she was. Kate immediately understood and stopped, trusting the protection team's judgment while remaining ready to move in whatever direction they indicated. The elderly woman who had been so helpful throughout the incident proved once again that ordinary citizens could make extraordinary contributions to security situations. She noticed Kate's position and Morrison's signal, then immediately began engaging nearby community members in conversation that naturally moved them away from the developing confrontation without creating obvious alarm. Morrison reached the suspicious individual just as the man withdrew his hand from inside his jacket. What emerged wasn't a weapon, but rather a folded piece of paper that he thrust toward Prince William while beginning to speak rapidly about his grievances against government policy. Morrison's relief at seeing paper instead of a weapon was immediately tempered by the realization that this could still be a distraction for another threat. The man's approach had been sophisticated enough to suggest planning and coordination, which meant there might be additional elements to this disruption that hadn't yet been identified. Morrison quickly restrained the individual. While scanning the surrounding crowd for any other suspicious movement or positioning, his radio crackled with confirmations from other security personnel that they were conducting similar assessments of their areas. Prince William handled the man's approach with remarkable composure, actually taking a moment to accept the paper and acknowledge the individual's concerns before allowing Morrison to intervene. This brief interaction served multiple purposes. It demonstrated William's genuine interest in hearing from citizens. It prevented the situation from escalating into obvious confrontation, and it gave the security team time to ensure there were no additional threats. The protest group that William had been engaging seemed genuinely surprised by how events had developed. Several of them approached Morrison to explain that the man with the paper wasn't part of their organized demonstration, confirming his suspicion that there had been multiple separate elements contributing to the day's security challenges. This information was valuable for understanding how the situation had developed and for planning better security for future events. Kate resumed her movement toward William's position once Morrison signaled that the immediate threat had been contained. Her approach drew attention from the crowd. Morrison could see that her presence was actually helping to normalize the situation. People began focusing on the opportunity to see both royals together, rather than on the security incident that had just been resolved. The community center director approached Morrison with obvious relief, suggesting that perhaps this would be a good time to move the planned activities indoors. Morrison agreed, recognizing that the outdoor environment had become too unpredictable to manage effectively with the current resources. He began coordinating with local police to create a clear pathway for the royal couple to enter the building safely. Morrison's radio brought updates from the advanced security team inside the community center, confirming that all planned activities could proceed normally once the royals were inside. The building's controlled environment would allow for much better security management, while still enabling Kate and William to complete their planned engagement with the community members who had been waiting to meet them. Prince William and Kate came together near the community center entrance, and Morrison could see them having a brief, quiet conversation about how to proceed. Their body language showed mutual concern and support, but also determination to complete their planned visit despite the complications they had encountered. This commitment to their public duties, even in challenging circumstances, was something Morrison had observed throughout his service with the royal family. The crowd began to organize itself more effectively as people realized the royals would be continuing with their planned activities inside the building. Many of the families who had been waiting to participate in the event formed a natural queue near the entrance, while others who had simply been curious observers began to disperse. The protesters who remained seemed less aggressive now that their main grievances had been acknowledged by Prince William. Personally, local police had taken custody of both the original attacker with the paint bottle and the man who had approached William with the paper. Morrison coordinated with the police commander to ensure that both individuals would be properly questioned to determine whether their actions had been coordinated or coincidental. Understanding the full scope of the security challenge was important for preventing similar incidents in the future. Morrison conducted a final assessment of the outdoor area before accompanying the royal couple inside. He noted the positions of all remaining security personnel, confirmed communication channels with local police, and verified that emergency evacuation routes remained clear. These routine checks were especially important after a security incident, as the heightened attention could sometimes attract additional unwanted interest. The elderly woman, who had been so helpful throughout the morning, approached Morrison briefly as the royals prepared to enter the building. She introduced herself as Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher who had organized many community events over the years. Morrison thanked her for her assistance and made sure her contact information was recorded, recognizing that citizens like Mrs. Henderson were often valuable allies in maintaining public safety during royal visits. As Prince William and Kate entered the community center together, Morrison reflected on how the morning's events had demonstrated both the challenges and the rewards of royal protection work. The combination of genuine threats, helpful citizens, and the royals' own courage and judgment had created a complex situation that required constant adaptation and professional expertise to manage successfully. Inside the community center, the atmosphere was dramatically different from the tension that had dominated the outdoor events. The building's controlled environment allowed Morrison to relax slightly, though his professional vigilance remained constant. The advanced security team had done excellent work preparing the space, with clear sight lines, controlled access points, and discreet positioning that would allow the royal couple to interact naturally with community members. Kate seemed to shake off the stress of the morning's incidents almost immediately once they were inside. Morrison watched as she engaged with the first family they encountered, a single mother with 2 young children who had been waiting for hours to meet the Duchess. Kate's ability to transition from a security situation to genuine personal connection was something that never ceased to impress the protection team. Prince William took a few more minutes to fully transition from the tactical awareness he had needed outside to the relaxed approachability expected for this type of community engagement. Morrison could see the prince scanning the room and making mental notes about exits, crowds, and potential issues before allowing himself to focus completely on the families present. This behavior reflected William's military training and his understanding of his own security needs. The community center director led the royal couple through a tour of the new children's facilities that had been built with charitable funding. Kate showed particular interest in the reading corner and art supplies, asking detailed questions about the programs and how they were helping local families. Her questions weren't just polite conversation. Morrison could see she was genuinely gathering information that might influence her future charitable work. About 30 minutes into the indoor program, Morrison received a radio update from the police commander outside. The interrogation of the two detained individuals had revealed that their actions had indeed been coordinated, but not as part of a larger organized threat against the royal family. They were environmental activists who had planned to disrupt the event to draw attention to climate change policies, and their research had failed to reveal the difference between government policy and royal duties. This information was both reassuring and concerning to Morrison. It was good to know there wasn't a broader security threat, but it highlighted how easily misinformed activists could create dangerous situations. The fact that they had successfully coordinated their actions without appearing on any security service watch lists suggested that future events might face similar unexpected challenges. Prince William's decision to engage directly with protesters earlier in the day was looking increasingly wise as reports came in about public reaction to the incident. Social media and news coverage were focusing on the prince's willingness to listen to citizen concerns rather than on the security disruption. This type of positive coverage was valuable for the royal family's public image and probably prevented the morning's events from becoming a larger controversy. Kate's interaction with the community members was generating exactly the kind of positive outcomes that made these visits worthwhile despite their security challenges. Morrison watched as she spent extended time with several families, learning about their specific needs and circumstances. One conversation with a grandmother caring for 3 grandchildren seemed to particularly impact Kate, who took notes and promised to look into additional support resources. The planned speech portion of the event went smoothly, with Kate delivering remarks about the importance of community support programs to an audience of about 40 local families and volunteers. Her message was personal and specific rather than generic, referencing conversations she had just had and demonstrating that she had genuinely absorbed what she had learned during the visit. Morrison noticed that Prince William had positioned himself where he could see both Kate and the audience during her speech, maintaining his own subtle awareness of the room's dynamics. The prince's protective instincts toward his wife were evident in small details like this, and Morrison appreciated that William's situational awareness made the security team's job easier rather than more complicated. During the question and answer session following Kate's speech, several community members asked about the incident outside and whether it would affect future royal visits to their area. Kate handled these questions with perfect diplomacy, acknowledging that public events sometimes involve challenges. While expressing enthusiasm for continued engagement with the community, her response struck exactly the right balance between honesty and assurance. One of the most meaningful moments of the visit came when Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who had been so helpful during the outdoor incident, was invited inside to meet the royal couple personally. Prince William and Kate both thanked her for her assistance and spent several minutes learning about her decades of community volunteer work. Morrison arranged for official recognition of her contributions to be processed through appropriate channels as the formal program concluded. Morrison began coordinating the departure procedures with his team. The outdoor situation had stabilized completely, with most of the crowd dispersed and normal traffic patterns resumed. However, the morning's events had demonstrated the need for enhanced security protocols for future community visits, particularly in areas where multiple groups might converge. Kate and William spent an additional 20 minutes meeting privately with families who had specific stories or needs they wanted to share. These individual conversations weren't part of the official program, but they represented the kind of personal engagement that made royal visits meaningful for community members. Morrison ensured these interactions could continue safely while Maintaining departure flexibility. Community center staff presented Kate with a photo album documenting the positive impact their programs had achieved over the past year. The Duchess spent considerable time reviewing the album and asking follow-up questions, demonstrating the genuine interest that made her such an effective advocate for charitable causes. Her attention to detail would undoubtedly influence how she approached similar organizations in the future. Morrison received confirmation from the outdoor security team that their departure route was clear and that media presence had reduced to normal levels for royal visits. The morning's incidents hadn't attracted the kind of extended news coverage that could create ongoing security complications, largely because of how professionally everyone had handled the situation. As Prince William and Kate prepared to leave the community center, Morrison reflected on how the day's events had demonstrated both the challenges and rewards of royal protection work. The combination of genuine threats, helpful citizens, professional teamwork, and the royals' own courage and judgment had turned a potentially serious security incident into a story of successful community engagement. The departure from the community center was handled with the efficiency that comes from experienced teamwork under pressure. Morrison coordinated with local police to ensure the route back to Kensington Palace was secure while maintaining the normal traffic flow that prevented the royal motorcade from creating additional public disruption. The morning's events had taught everyone involved valuable lessons about adapting security procedures without compromising the purpose of royal engagements. During the drive back to the palace, Prince William and Kate discussed the morning's events with the kind of professional analysis that Morrison had come to expect from them. They weren't dwelling on the security challenges, but rather on how to ensure that future community visits could be even more effective. Their conversation focused on the genuine connections they had made with local families and the policy insights they had gained. Kate specifically mentioned Mrs. Henderson's contribution to managing the crowd situation and suggested that community liaisons like her might be valuable resources for future events. Morrison made notes about this suggestion, recognizing that experienced local volunteers could indeed enhance both security and community engagement if properly coordinated. With protection teams, Prince William reflected on his decision to engage directly with the protesters, acknowledging that it had involved calculated risks, but it ultimately helped diffuse the tension. Morrison appreciated that the prince understood both the benefits and dangers of such direct engagement, as this awareness would be important for planning future responses to similar situations. Morrison's radio brought final updates from the incident investigation. The two detained individuals had been released with warnings after confirming that their actions hadn't been part of any broader threat. Their environmental activism had been misguided but not malicious, and their cooperation with police questioning had provided valuable information about how such disruptions might be prevented in the future. Back at Kensington Palace, Morrison participated in the standard post-event briefing with the full protection team. These sessions were crucial for analyzing what had worked well and what needed improvement, ensuring that lessons learned could be applied to enhance security for future engagements. The morning's events provided numerous discussion points that would influence royal protection protocols going forward. The advanced security team's preparation of the community center had been exemplary, and their ability to maintain secure conditions inside the building had allowed the visit's primary objectives to be achieved despite outdoor complications. Morrison made sure this success was properly documented, as it demonstrated the value of thorough advance work in managing complex security environments. Mrs. Henderson's spontaneous assistance during the crisis had been so valuable that Morrison recommended developing protocols for identifying and coordinating with helpful community members during future events. Her teacher's instincts for managing difficult situations had proved more effective than additional security personnel might have been in similar circumstances. The positive media coverage of the event was already appearing online, with news reports focusing on Prince William's engagement with protesters and Kate's meaningful connections with community families. The security incidents were mentioned only briefly, and the overall narrative emphasized the royal couple's commitment to authentic, public engagement even in challenging circumstances. Morrison completed his official incident report that afternoon, documenting every aspect of the morning's events for review by senior protection personnel and palace officials. His report included recommendations for enhanced crowd management procedures and suggestions for better coordination between royal protection teams and local law enforcement. During community visits, Kate's private secretary contacted Morrison later that day to request follow-up information about several families the Duchess had met during the visit. Kate intended to ensure that appropriate support resources were connected with those families, demonstrating how royal visits could generate tangible benefits beyond their immediate symbolic value. Morrison provided the requested information while maintaining appropriate privacy protections. The community center director sent a formal thank you letter to the palace, expressing appreciation for how the royal couple had handled the morning's challenges and emphasizing the positive impact their visit had achieved despite the complications. The letter specifically mentioned how Prince William's willingness to listen to protesters had impressed even those community members who disagreed with the activists. Methods Morrison received a private commendation from his supervisors for his handling of the security situation, particularly his coordination with local police and his recognition of Mrs. Henderson's valuable contributions. The commendation noted that the incident had been resolved without injury to any member of the public and without compromising the visit's community engagement objectives. Prince William and Kate sent personal thank you notes to key community center staff and volunteers, including Mrs. Henderson. These gestures, which weren't required by protocol, demonstrated the genuine appreciation that had made them so effective in public roles. Morrison ensured that appropriate security clearances were maintained for delivering these personal messages. The lessons learned from the morning's events were incorporated into updated security protocols within 2 weeks. These improvements included better systems for identifying potential protest activity, enhanced coordination procedures with local police, and guidelines for recognizing and working with helpful community members during public events. 6 months later, Morrison accompanied Prince William and Kate on their return visit to the same community center. The enhanced security protocols developed after the first visit created a much smoother environment, but the royal couple's approach remained the same. Genuine engagement with community members and authentic interest in their experiences and needs. Mrs. Henderson was among the invited guests for the return visit. Having been formally recognized for her community service contributions, Morrison watched as she and Kate discussed the positive changes that had occurred at the center since the Duchess's first visit, demonstrating the lasting impact that royal engagement could achieve when combined with professional security management. Looking back on the incident months later, Morrison realized it had represented everything that made royal protection work both challenging and rewarding. The combination of genuine threats, public service, personal courage, and community cooperation had created a situation where professional expertise could enable meaningful engagement between the royal family and the citizens they served. It was exactly the kind of successful outcome that made the complexities and risks of royal protection worthwhile.